All right, the next couple problems on the skills practice have to do with making calculations. So these are hopefully basic order of operations type of situations where you're just simplifying generally a fraction. So this first one is something called a z-score, and we'll look at this towards the second half of the class. And what a z-score does is it just allows you to tell how unusual something is. So, for example, if somebody said that they were 150 inches tall, that would be really unusual, right? So we would expect that maybe they're more like 60, 65, something like that. So this Z-score thing just helps us to make that determination a little bit better in the case of things that aren't as clear as someone being 150 inches tall. So the problem does tell you that typical values are -3 to +3, so those would be normal, and anything out of that is unusual. So what you're going to be asked to do, there's a story here, and you're going to make this calculation. So ultimately, what you want to put in the calculator is this number here. What I'm doing though is I'm trying to get you used to the vocabulary and the symbols that we use for these calculations. So when we get to them in class, they're really not quite so scary looking as they are if you haven't played around with this a little bit. So we will do some of these by hand, and ultimately we'll be using technology to help us with these as well. So what we're going to do here is we're looking at taking the value that we're interested and subtracting the average, and then dividing it by the standard deviation. So our story is that women's heights have an average of 63.6 inches and a standard deviation of 2.5. And we're interested in a woman who has a height of 70 inches. So there's our 70 inches, and there's our average height of 63.6, and then our standard deviation is 2.5. Okay, and you'll know what a standard deviation is really soon, so just hang tight with that for a minute. So what you want to do is just simplify this. So I'm going to start by subtracting the top. I have 70 minus 63.6, so that'll give me 6.4 over 2.5, so I'll divide that by 2.5, and that gives me 2.56. So when I look at the choices, there's only one that's 2.56. So I'm not out to trick you. The right one will be sitting right there. I'm not going to make these super, super close. The only one that's even close is this -1. But it's not between -3 and +3. So that sentence just doesn't even make sense. Okay, so I promise I'm really not trying to trip you up here. So we would circle this one or mark that one. That's the same number we got. And since it is between -3 and +3, we would say that that height of 70 inches is not really unusual. All right, so the next thing we're going to calculate is something for a confidence interval. So a confidence interval might be like you ask your friend what time they're going to be ready to go to dinner, and they say, well, sometime between 5 and 5:30. So it's a range of values, and you're hoping your friend is going to show up between 5 and 5:30. And so to get the 5 o'clock number, we're going to do this one, and to get what would be the upper end, that 5:30 time frame, we're going to do this. So really the only difference between these two is just the sign that's here. There's a negative sign and a positive sign, so we're adding and subtracting. And the easiest way to do this with calculators is actually to find this part here first. This 1.96 times 2 divided by the square root of 4. 2 divided by the square root of 4. So that gives me 1.96. So I'll do 24 minus 1.96 and 24 plus 1.96. So 24 minus gives me 22.04. So that's what I would type in that box. And the other one I'll do 24 plus. That'll give me 25.96. So that's what I would type in that box. All right, and last one that's going to have kind of a similar feel with this number over the square root here. We're going to calculate something called a test statistic. And so we have a 63 minus 60 at the top. So this is ultimately an order of operations simplification. So even though I'm calling it a test statistic, and that's what we'll ultimately use it for, I'm just asking you to do the math here. So 63 minus 60 is going to give me a 3. And then I have 5 divided by the square root of 25. So that gives me 1. And so 3 over 1 is just equal to 3. So that's what I would type in the box, and that's all you need for these ones. So even though there's a lot of information here, I'm really just wanting you to practice this calculation and knowing that eventually this is going to start sinking in. So when we do get to it in the second half of the course, you're gonna be like, oh, I've calculated that already. I know what this is. And now I'm going to understand how it works in statistics.